Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
At the Pistol's Point by E.W. Hornung. The church bells were ringing for evensong, croaking across the snow with short, harsh strokes, as though the frost had eaten into the metal and made it hoarse. Outside, the scene had all the cheery sparkle, all the peaceful glamour of an old-fashioned Christmas card. There was a snow-covered village, there was the church spire, coated all down one side, the chancel windows standing out like oil paintings, the silver sickle of a moon, the ideal thatched cottage with a warm red light, breaking from the open door, and the peace of heaven seemingly pervading and enveloping all. Yet on earth we know that this peace is not, and the door of the ideal cottage had been opened and was shut by a crushed woman, whose husband had but now refused her pennies for the plate, the curse which followed her into the snow, and the odor prevailing beneath the thatched roof was one of hot brandy and water, mingled with the fumes of some rank tobacco. Old Fitch was over 60 years of age, and the woman, on her way to church, was his third wife. She had borne him no child, nor had Fitch son or daughter living who would set foot inside his house. He was a singular old man, selfish and sly and dissolute, yet not greatly disliked beyond his own door, and the miracle of health and energy for his years. He drank to his heart's content, but he was never drunk, nor was Sunday's bottle ever known to lose him the soft side of Monday's bargain. By trade, he was a game dealer, corn factor, money lender, and mortgage of half the village. In appearance, a man of medium height, with bow legs and immense round shoulders, a hard mouth, shrewd eyes, and wiry hair as white as the snow outside. The bell ceased, and for a moment there was no sound in the cottage but the song of the kettle on the hob. Then Fitch reached for the brandy bottle and brewed himself another steaming bumper. As he watched the sugar dissolve, a few notes from the organ reached his ears, and the old man smiled cynically as he sipped and smacked his lips. At his elbow his tobacco pipe and the weekly newspaper were ranged, with the brandy bottle, and he was soon in enjoyment of all three. Over the paper Fitch had already fallen asleep, after a particularly hearty midday meal, but he had not so much as glanced at the most entertaining pages, and he found them now more entertaining than usual. There was a scandal in high life running to several columns, and subdivided into paragraphs labeled with the most pregnant headlines. The old man's mouth watered, as he determined to leave this item to the last. It was not the only one of interest. There were several suicides, an admirable execution, a burglary, and what? French frowned as his quick eye came tumbling down a paragraph, and all at once grasped out an oath and sat very still. The pipe in his mouth went out. The brandy and water was cooling in his glass. You might have heard them singing the psalms in the church hard by, but the old man heard nothing, saw nothing, thought of nothing but the brief paragraph before his eyes. Escape from Portland. One convict killed, another wounded, but a third gets clean away. The greatest excitement was caused at Weymouth yesterday morning, on the report being circulated that several convicts had effected their escape from the grounds of the Portland convict establishment. There appears to have been a regularly concerted plan on the part of the prisoners working in one of the outdoor gangs to attempt to regain their liberty, as yesterday morning 3 convicts bolted simultaneously from their party. They were instantly challenged to stop, but as the order was not complied with, the warders fired several shots. One of the runaways fell dead, and another was so badly wounded that he was immediately recaptured and is now lying in a precarious condition. The third man, named Henry Cattermole, continued his course despite a succession of shots and was soon beyond range of the rifles. He was pursued for some distance, but was ultimately lost to view in the thick fog which prevailed. A hue and cry was raised, and search parties continued to scour the neighborhood long after dark, But up to a late hour, his recapture had not been effected. Cattermole will be remembered as the man who was sentenced to death some years ago for the murder of Lord Woolborough's gamekeeper near Bury St. Edmunds, but who afterwards received the benefit of the doubt, involved in the production of a wad which did not fit the convict's gun. In spite of the successful efforts then made on his behalf, however, the authorities of Portland describes Cattermole as a most daring criminal, and one who is only too likely to prove a danger to the community as long as he remains at large. Fitch stared stupidly at the words for several minutes. After he had read them through, it was the last sentence which at length fell into focus with his seeing eye. Henry Cattermole at large. How long had he been at large? It was a Sunday paper, but the Saturday edition, and this was among the latest news. But it said yesterday morning, and that meant Friday morning, last. So Henry Cattermole had been at large since then, and this was the Sunday evening, and that made nearly 3 days altogether. Another question now forced itself upon the old man's mind. How far was it from Portland prison to this room? Like most rustics of his generation, old Fitch had no spare knowledge of geography. He knew his own countryside and the road to London, but that was all. Portland he knew to be on the other side of London. It might be 10 miles, might be 200. But this he felt in his shuddering heart and shaking bones, that near or far, deep snow or no snow, Henry Cattermole was either recaptured or else on his way to that cottage at that moment. The feeling sucked the blood from the old man's vessels, even as his lips drained the tumbler he had filled with so light a heart. Then for a little he had spurious courage. He leant back in his chair and laughed aloud. It sounded strangely in the empty cottage. He looked up at the bell-mouthed gun over the chimney-piece, and that gave him greater confidence, for he kept it loaded. He got up and began to whistle, but soon in the middle of a bar. "Curse him," he said aloud. "They should have hanged him, and then I never should have been held like this. That'll be a good job if they take and hang him now, for I fear to feel afraid. I do, as long as Harry Cattermole's alive." Old Fitch opened his door a moment, saw the thin moon shining on the snow, but no living soul abroad, and for once he was in want of a companion. However, the voices of the choir sounded nearer than ever in the frosty air, and heartened him a little as he shut the door again, turned the heavy key, and shot both bolts well home. He was still stooping over the bottom one when his eyes fell upon a ragged trouser leg and a stout stocking planted close behind him. It was instantly joined by another ragged leg and another stout stocking. Neither made a sound, for there were no shoes to the cat-like feet. The stockings were remarkable for most conspicuous stripe. The old Fitch knew that his enemy had found him out, and he could not stir. He was waiting for a knife to plunge into the center of his broad round back, and when a hand slapped him there instead, he thought for a moment he was stabbed indeed. When he knew that he was not, he turned round, still stooping, in a pitiable attitude, and a new shock greeted him. Could this be Henry Cattermole? The poacher had been stout and thick-set. The convict was gaunt and lean. The one had been florid and youthful, the other was yellow as parchment, and the stubble on the cropped head and on the fleshless jaw was of a leaden gray. That ain't Harry Cattermole," the old man whimpered. "No, that ain't, but 'twas once, and means to be again. Lead the way inside beside the fire. I wish you sometimes use that front parlor of yours. I've had it to myself this half-hour, and that's cold." Old Fitch led the way without a word, walked innocently up to the fire, and suddenly sprang for his gun. He never reached it. The barrel of a revolver screwed round in his ear drove him reeling across the floor. "Silly old fool," hissed Cattermole. "Did you think I'd come to you unarmed? Sit down in that chair before I blow your brains out." Fitch obeyed. I can't make out," he stuttered, "why you fared to come to me at all." "Of course you can't," said Cattermole ironically. "If I'd been you, I'd have run anywhere but where I was known so well. You would you? Then you knew I'd got out, huh, old man? Just been a reading about it in this here paper. I see. I caught a bit of what you was a saying to yourself, just as I was thinking it was a safe thing to come out of that cold parlor of yours. So that was me you was locking out, was it? Yet you pretend you don't know why I come? You know well enough. You know. The convict had seated himself on the kitchen table and was glaring down on the trembling old man in the chair. He wore a long overcoat and under it some pitiful rags. The cropped head and the legs swinging and the striped stockings were the only incriminating features, and old Fitch was glancing from the one to the other, wondering why neither had saved him from this horrible interview. Cattermole read his thoughts, and his eyes gleamed. So you think I've come all the way, and these here do you? He cried, tapping one shin. I tell you, I've walked and walked till my bare legs were frozen, and then sat behind a hedge and slipped these on and rubbed them to life again. Where do you think I got these rotten old duds? Off a scarecrow in a field. I did. I wasn't going to break into no houses and leave my tracks all along the line. But yesterday I got a long lift in a goods train, or I shouldn't be here now. And last night I did crack a crib for this here overcoat and a bit of supper and another for the shooter. That didn't so much matter then. I was within 20 miles of you. Of you, you old devil. Do you hear? Fitch smiled with an ashen face. And now do you know why I've come? Fitch moistened his blue lips. To murder me? He whispered like a dying man. That rests with you, said the convict, fondling the weapon. What do you want me to do? Confess. Confess what? Whispered Fitch. That you swore me away at the trial. The old man had been holding his breath. He now expelled it with a deep sigh, and taking out a huge red handkerchief, wiped the moisture from his face. Meanwhile, the convict had described writing materials on a chiffonier and placed them on the table beside the brandy bottle and the tobacco jar. Turn your chair round for writing. Fitch did so. Now take up your pen and write what I tell you. Don't cock your head and look at me. I hear the psalms singing as well as you do. They've only just got started, and nobody'll come near us for another hour. Pity you didn't go, too, isn't it? Now write what I tell you, word for word, or so help me, you're a stiff one. Fitch dipped his pen in the ink. After all, what he was about to write would be written under dire intimidation, and nobody would attach any importance to statements so obtained. He squared his elbows to the task. I, Samuel Fitch, began Cattermole, do hereby swear and declare before God Almighty. Before God Almighty, have you got that down? That I, Samuel Fitch, did bear false witness against my neighbor, Henry Cattermole, at his trial at Barry Assizes, November 29, 1887. It is true that I saw both Henry Cattermole and James Savage, his lordship's gamekeeper, in the wood at Walborough on the night of September 9th, in the same year. It is true that I was there by appointment with Savage, as his wife stated in her evidence. It is not true that I heard a shot and heard Savage sing out, Harry Cattermole, as I came up, and before ever I had a word with him. That statement was a deliberate fabrication on my part. The real truth is... But hold on, I'm likely going too fast for you. I've had it in my head that long. How much have you got down, Fabrication on my part, repeated old Fitch, in a trembling voice, as he waited for more. Good. Now pull yourself together, said Cattermole, suddenly cocking his revolver. The real truth is that I, Samuel Fitch, shot James Savage with my own hand. Fitch threw down the pen. That's a lie, he gasped. I never did. I won't write it. The cocked revolver covered him. Prefer to die in your chair? Yes. I'll give you 1 minute by your own watch. Still covering his man, the convict held out his other hand for the watch and had momentary contact with a cold, damp one as it dropped into his palm. Cattermole placed the watch upon the table where both could see the dial. "Your minute begins now," said he, and all at once the watch was ticking like an 8-day clock. Fitch rolled his head from side to side. 15 seconds, said Cattermole. The old man's brow was white and spangled like the snow outside. Half time, said Cattermole. 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds passed. Then Fitch caught up the pen. Go on, he groaned. I'll write any lie you like. That'll do you no good. No one will believe a word of it. Yet the perspiration was streaming down his face. It splashed upon the paper as he proceeded to write in trembling characters at Cattermole's dictation. The real truth is that I, Samuel Fitch, shot James Savage with my own hand. The circumstances that led to my shooting him, I will confess and explain hereafter. When he had fallen, I heard a shout and someone running up. I got behind a tree, but I saw Harry Cattermole, the poacher, trip clean over the body. His gun went off in the air, and when he tried to get up again, I saw he couldn't because he'd twisted his ankle. He never saw me. I slipped away and gave my false evidence. And Harry Cattermole was caught escaping from the woods on his hands and knees, with blood upon his hands and clothes, and an empty gun. I gave evidence against him to stop him giving evidence against me. But this is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Cattermole paused. Fitch finished writing, and the eyes of the two men met, and those of the elder gleamed with a cunning curiosity. How did you know? He asked, lowering his voice and leaning forward as he spoke. 2 and 2 was the reply. I put them together as soon as ever I saw you in the box. That'll never be believed. Not like this. Will it not? Wait a bit. You've not done yet. As a proof of what I say, do you hear me? As a proof of what I say, the gun which the wad will fit, that saved Henry Cattermole's life, will be found. Cattermole waited until the old man had caught him up. Now, said he, you finish the sentence for yourself. What? Cried Fitch. Right where the gun's to be found. You know. I don't. And then sign your name. But I don't know. You do. I sold it. You wouldn't dare. You've got that somewhere. I see it in your face. Write down where, and then show me the place. And if you told a lie. The revolver was within a foot of the old man's head, which had fallen forward between his hands. The pen lay blotting the wet paper. Cattermole took the brandy bottle, pulled out a stiff dram, and pushed it under the other's nose. Drink, he cried. Then write the truth and sign your name. Maybe they won't hang an old man like you, but by God, I shan't think twice about shooting you if you don't write the truth. Fitch gulped down the brandy, took up the pen once more, and was near the end of his own death warrant when the convict sprang lightly from the table and stood listening in the center of the room. Fitch saw him and listened too. In the church they were singing another hymn. The old man saw by his watch still lying on the table that it must be the last hymn, and in a few minutes his wife would be back. But that was not all. There was another sound, a nearer sound, the sound of voices outside the door. The handle was turned, the door pushed, but Fitch himself had locked and bolted it. More whispers and a loud rat-tat. Who is it? Cried Fitch, trembling with excitement as he started to his feet. The police! Let us in, or we break in your door. There was no answer. Cattermole was watching the door. Suddenly he turned, and there was Fitch in the act of dropping his written confession into the fire. The convict seized it before it caught, and with the other hand hurled the old man back into the chair. Finish it, he said below his breath, or you're a dead man. One or other of us is going to swing. Now, then, under the floor. Or what room did you hide the gun? Let them hammer the door strong. What room was it? Ah, your bedroom. Now sign your name. A deafening crash. The lock had given. Only the bolt held firm. Sign! Shrieked Cattermole. A cold ring pressed the old man's temple. He signed his name and fell forward on the table in a dead faint. Cattermole blotted the confession, folded it up, strode over to the door, and smilingly flung it open to his pursuers. The Best Policy by Ferenc Molnar. Monsieur Bayou, president of the National Farmers Bank, sent for his secretary Filbert one morning. Tell me, Filbert, he said, who is this man Floriat down at our Perpignan branch? Floriat? That's the cashier. He's acting as manager temporarily. You remember, sir, the old manager Boucher died, and we haven't found anyone to put in his place yet. Floriat's looking after things meanwhile. There isn't very much business in Perpignan. Monsieur Bayat took a letter from his desk. Well, apparently he's robbing us. I've had this letter from Perpignan. It's anonymous, I admit, but... He handed Filbert a not very clean sheet of notepaper on which, in a somewhat unformed hand, the following lines were written. To the President of the National Farmers Market, dear sir, we farmers are putting our hard-earned savings in your bank at Perpignan, and one fine day we shall wake up and find it has gone bankrupt, and all our savings are lost. It is bound to happen the way things are going on here. You probably don't know that the cashier, Monsieur Floriat, has been embezzling money for months past. He must have put away a tidy packet by now, but of course by the time you high and mighty gentlemen in Paris realize what's going on, all the money will be gone. Send an inspector down to Perpignan tomorrow, Philibert, said the President, but tell him to be tactful. We don't want to upset the man. There's probably no foundation for the story. Monsieur Floriat, temporary manager of the Perpignan branch, stared at the inspector from Paris with horrified amazement. Inspect my books, he echoed. What, now? In the middle of the month? Without any notification? It's a bit unusual, isn't it? The inspector felt sorry for the agitated little man. There's nothing to worry about, Monsieur Floriat. We do this at all our branches from time to time. The President gets these sudden fits. It's only a formality. I'll be through in half an hour. Yes, but people will talk, especially in a small place like this, Floriat wailed. Everyone will be saying that I've been up to something shady. Think of the disgrace. Nobody's going to know anything about it, the inspector said a trifle impatiently. That is, of course, unless you yourself talk. Well, can I see the books now? 2 days later, Philibert entered the President's room. I am able to report on the inspector's visit to Perpignan, sir. Everything is in order. Not a single sou missing. Good. One really ought not to pay any attention to these disgusting anonymous letter writers. Thanks, Philibert. Less than a month later, the President again summoned his secretary. It's quite ridiculous, he said testily, but I've had another anonymous letter about Perpignan. The writer declares that the books weren't properly examined. Apparently, Floriat made such a song and dance about the whole thing that an accomplice had time to replace the stolen money. We really ought to have gone into the matter more thoroughly. Do we have to make another investigation? Filbert asked ruefully. The President drummed his fingers on the desk. I don't like doing it. All the same, it's a duty we owe to our clients. If there is something in it, and people find out afterwards that we were warned, there'll be a nasty scandal. I'm afraid the only thing to do is send the inspector down again. And this time, let him do the job thoroughly. I want to clear this up once and for all. The same day, 3 of the bank's most reliable inspectors set out for Perpignan. This time Monsieur Floriat was really taken by surprise. One of the officials kept guard over him, while the other 2 carried out a thorough examination of his accounts, lasting over 4 hours. They found nothing missing and the books in perfect order. I only wish things were as satisfactory in all our branches, the chief inspector said, as he bade farewell to the completely shattered Floriat. A week later, Monsieur Floriat of Perpignan is waiting to see you, Sir Philibert announced. Departing from his usual habit, Monsieur Bayat rose and advanced toward his visitor with an outstretched hand. Floriat, however, gave a stiff little bow. I've come to hand in my resignation, sir, he said. Your resignation? You can't mean that, my dear Floriat. Why? You found it necessary to have my books examined twice running, sir. Naturally, it caused a lot of talk. Even though I was proved to be an honest man, it made a bad impression. People are saying there must have been some good reason why the head office sent down twice to have my affairs investigated. My reputation's gone. I'm not a young man, and I have a wife to think of. Monsieur Bayard was deeply moved. I'll make it my personal responsibility to see that your name is cleared. Wait a minute, though. The manager's job is still vacant. Would you like to have it? No one could doubt your honesty then, could they? Yes, and you'll get a pretty substantial increase in salary, too. You really mean? Floriat stammered. Of course, my dear fellow. The bank will be fortunate in keeping the services of so conscientious a worker. Back at his home in Perpignan, Pierre Floriat slid his feet into the comfortable felt slippers his wife handed him. At last, he grunted, in a good-humored voice. What's the use of being an honest man if nobody hears of it? I might have gone on being a cashier for years and years, and the people at the head office would never have known how honest I was. They know now, Madame Floriat beamed, regarding her husband with admiration. Those letters were a wonderful idea of yours. Beyond Reasonable Doubt by Robert C. Dennis. It was a basement place, grimy and smoke-hung, with red checkered tablecloths and an oiled floor. Too many tables were crowded too close together, so that having your drink knocked into your lap by a stranger's elbow was an ever-present contingency. That sort of place. A waiter in an apron that could ne'er possibly have been white finally got around to me. Name it, he said. Glenny Tyson still singing here, I asked. You can call it singing, the waiter said, and as far as I know, she's here. You've been spending too much time at the Philharmonic, I said disagreeably. You've lost touch with what the common people like. Don't get sore, he protested. If you like her, she's good. If you don't like her, she ain't. I don't like her. I'm entitled to my opinion, ain't I? He leaned over confidentially. Maybe I never listened very good, though. Every time she sings, I remember she got herself in a big jam a few years ago. Nobody ever found out what really did happen, did they? It never came out, I admitted. Some says she did it. Some says she didn't. I always wondered. When she first came here to work, I used to look at her and think, did she or didn't she? He stared at me expectantly. I was wondering, you being an old friend of hers? She never told me, I said evenly, and he went away mumbling to himself to get me a bottle of beer. I stared around that mean, dismal room, at the glaring center lights in the shadowed corners, the ridiculous little square where no one was dancing, for the simple reason there was no orchestra, and at the dark floor, where the oil, covering God knows what stains, was so heavy the bottoms of my shoes were slick. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see Glenny in this background. I shut my eyes and remembered her the first time I saw her, 7 million years ago. 7 years ago. She was singing in Mike Nellie's place then, and Mike brought her over to talk to me because I was covering the night spots then, and he wanted me to give her a plug. She was that kind of pretty girl, with a placid and deep-set harmony that was more quiet in her glow than structural beauty. Gordon Corbett. Glenny, Mike said. Be nice to him, but not too nice. There's a limit to what help he can give you. She slipped into the chair across from me, and Mike went away. The first thing she said was, I don't really need any help. That was a new approach. It will only be a mention of you and where you're appearing. Oh, she said, that's all right. Have you heard me sing? Not yet. Are you good? I will be, as good as I need to be. She was very serious about it. I'll sing in the best places in town someday. Everybody think that's a laugh. They don't think I have the talent, but I know. She was serene in her own confidence. One way or another, I'll get what I want. I always have. Then I asked her about her background because I sensed it was from there that her own overpowering ambition had its genesis. It wasn't really an unusual story. I had heard of others like it before, and plenty since. A childhood of poverty and hard work. Her father had walked out on her mother, leaving Glenny and 2 boys. They were 6 at the time. The mother promptly had a heart attack and never worked again. The problem of existence lay on Glenny's shoulders then. She got a job as a waitress in a railroad cafe. It didn't pay much, and it was hard work, what with the boys to be fed and dressed and sent off to school. Later she was a salesgirl, a cashier in a movie house, and finally a model. Then I found I had a voice, she explained. So, I got a job singing. I was 20 then. Mother had died and my father was married again. He took the boys with him. She said it as if it were all very right and logical, that he should, and she was being unreasonable to wish she could have kept them. But she'd been quite lost without them, although she explained they were growing up anyway, and didn't really need me. That was the one and only time she ever mentioned the boys. 2 months after our meeting, I asked her to marry me. I was just a struggling reporter then, but I knew in time I'd get to where I could really take care of her. In that funny, grave way, she said, "Thank you, Gordon, but I'm going to be a big nightclub star." It did no good to argue. She had that ambition, and until that was settled one way or the other, I simply had nothing to interest her. I left her alone, finally waiting till her failure became obvious even to herself. I stayed away for 3 months, not seeing her, never hearing anything of her. And then one evening, I dropped into Mike Nellie's and asked for her. "Glennie's getting married," Mike said. "Married?" I didn't believe him. "You're crazy. Who to?" "Lee Vining. Owns a Tampico. Big handsome guy with a little scar right at the edge of his hair." "I know him," I said mechanically. Of course she was going to sing at Tampico. I remembered she had once said she always got where she wanted to go, one way or another. I got pretty bitter for a while, telling myself I was right about one thing. She hadn't got there on her ability alone. Probably she hadn't gotten anywhere from the time she wrangled that waitress job at 14 on sheer talent. Or maybe the quality of waiting, recognizing and seizing opportunities is talent. I don't know. I read about her wedding in the papers and the announcement of her opening 3 weeks later at the Tampico. She got good reviews. I stayed away drinking like a camel until I was suddenly ashamed of myself. Then I dated one of the girls from the paper to make it look right and caught the show one night in November from a ringside table. When Glennie finished her first number, I knew she rated her reviews. A good band, a flashy setting, and the knowledge that as the boss's wife her job was safe helped a lot. But she'd improved. Or maybe I didn't recognize talent when I saw it. With Glennie, I never knew. I was too close to her to know if she was really good. Lee Vining was there in her dressing room when I went back to see her. His dark face got a shade darker when she ran over and hugged me. I didn't mean a thing, but he didn't like it. She pulled me by the hand across the room. "You know Lee, don't you?" "Hello, Corbett," Vining said. I knew Vining from years back, and there was little about him I liked. As Glennie's husband, I liked him even less. He had a possessiveness based on an overwhelming ego. The thought that there could be or had ever been another man was pure torture to him. He had a passion for possessing things that lesser mortals could only crave. He wanted people to be envious of him. In this case, he ended up being jealous of others because he was uncertain he possessed Glennie. I caught my first glimmering of that when he laughed nastily and moved to the door. "I'll leave you in Corbett's hands, baby. At least he's a man, not a rabbit like your little piano player." I'd never seen Glennie lose her temper before. I had known one so outwardly placid could flare up so fast. "Tommy isn't a rabbit," she snapped. "Just because he isn't muscle bound doesn't make him any less a man. And a gentleman, too." "A gentleman rabbit," Vining amended, and went out, his laugh mocking her. "Tommy Amarides," Glennie said quietly, as if I had a right to know all about it. "A real artist, I think, but he needs confidence in himself." "How does it feel to be a real artist yourself?" I asked. "A Tampico." "I worked hard for this, Gordon," she said, giving me an even stare. "No matter how I got here, I worked hard to rate it. And I've had only a very few complaints on the job of being a wife." I wasn't being cynical, I told her. "You're even better than the Tampico. You're still climbing." "Am I?" she said absently. "That's nice." That should have been a tip-off. Glennie didn't care. Her career was no longer important. That's what she had said. Unwittingly, the desire to get up there on top of the world was gone. Not that it made any difference to me. She was long past the point where there was anything I could do to help her, even if she would have let me do it. She hadn't let me. I remembered when she really needed help, but it confused me. I had the feeling I had failed her in some way. We talked for a few minutes longer and then I left. I thought it was the last time I'd ever be with her. I remember I got drunk again and caught pneumonia in the cold November night, but I didn't let Glennie know. I glanced at my watch and saw there was 5 minutes to go. I finished my beer and ordered another because I didn't want the waiter to think I was going to nurse the one bottle through the floor show. I don't want you thinking I'm trying to stick my nose in, he explained when he brought the second bottle. If she'd done it, it's her business. But it's like answering a riddle and looking to see if you guessed right, and finding the answer is missing. See what I mean? It drives you nutty wondering, did she kill him or didn't she? I know what you mean, I told him, but I haven't seen her since that time. He leaned over eagerly. It's just curiosity, he said. I admit it, but if you find out, would you give me the sign? It's been driving me nuts. His tone was pleading, her being right under my nose all the time, so to speak. You know how it is. I know, I said, and he took that to mean that I'd tell him. We parted then something like friends. It was a rainy night, late in April, when Glennie had come to see me in my small apartment. There was a bruise on her cheekbone the size of a silver dollar. She kept her hand over it, trying hard to hide it, but I saw it at once. Vining? I said through clenched teeth. I'll kill the rotten. Where is he? It's all right, Gordon. She was very embarrassed. I didn't come for help. I wanted to think quietly. I didn't know where else to go. I took her coat and made her sit down. You're not going back, I raged. If he tries to see you again, so help me, I'll break his back. She looked at me almost indifferently. It was as much my fault, Gordon. Was it over Amarides? I asked more quietly. In a way, she admitted. There's been nothing wrong between Tom and me. I've just tried to help him a little, give him the confidence he needs. He's had a bad time of it, Gordon. He's so unworldly. I knew Vining wouldn't fire the piano player because that wouldn't prove anything. He wanted Glennie to voluntarily renounce her interest in Tommy Amarides in favor of him. That was the only way he would know he possessed her completely. As for Amarides, I imagined he'd stay as long as Glennie was there. She curled up on my daybed. Just let me think it out, she pleaded, a little soul-searching. I sat in a big chair and watched her. She lay back, staring up at the ceiling. The rain was still batting at the windows, and that was the only sound in the room. She didn't speak for so long, I finally dozed in my chair. I don't know how long I sat there half asleep, but finally I came wide awake to find her standing beside my chair, staring down at me. She had her coat on. You look like a little boy when you're asleep, she said softly, and leaned down and kissed me. It was the only thing, excepting casual goodnight kisses, that she'd ever kissed me. She put her arms around me, pillowing my head against her, resting her face in my hair. It was a moment of such ineffable peace and beauty that I knew I had to keep her, no matter what. Stay with me, I whispered. Don't leave me, I need you so. You should have called for me when you had pneumonia, she chided softly. I would have come and taken care of you. Her arms tightened, and I was so positive that she was on the point of saying that she was going to stay, I pulled her down on my lap. I'll take care of you, darling, I said. Somehow, that broke the web-like spell of the moment. I didn't know why, but she stood up and patted my cheek. I'm all right now, she said. I'll know what to do. I guess I didn't really understand myself until tonight. She went quickly to the door, hesitated, looking back as if momentarily uncertain about something. But all she said was, you look like a little boy when you're asleep. The next day, Lee Vining's death made every front page in town. He was found with a bullet in his head, on the floor of his office at the Tampico. A week later, Glennie was charged with his murder. In some ways, her trial was the strangest I ever heard of. She pleaded not guilty and then offered absolutely no defense for herself. Her lawyer argued rather hopelessly that Vining had accidentally shot himself while cleaning a revolver. He tried to make a point of the time of death, saying it was earlier than the experts estimated. And, if so, she couldn't have shot him because she was at my apartment during that time. The prosecutor tried, not very hard, to try to make her visit to me a rendezvous. But his real target was the piano player, Tommy Amarides, a thin, wistful little man with nothing to say. All the details of Glennie's friendship for Tommy came out. She had befriended him. Her husband had objected. She wouldn't give him up. Vining had knocked the piano player around more than once. She wanted a divorce and a large settlement so she could marry Tommy. Vining refused. If she left empty-handed. He made quite a point of Glennie marrying her husband for a chance to sing in his nightclub. That he declared was the only way she could have achieved even that degree of success. If she left Vining, she was finished. And so he thundered. She took the only alternative. Callously, in cold blood, she put a bullet in her husband's head so that she would be free. The jury stayed out 6 hours. Then they brought in a verdict of not guilty. In a statement to the newspapers, the foreman said the prosecutor failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was murder. Right after the trial, Glennie phoned me and said she was going to visit with relatives in Canada. She gave up all claims to any of Vining's estate, silencing for a time those who insisted she had gotten away with murder. Later, however, the same critics evolved the theory that she killed Vining in anger after one of his periodic assaults on Tommy Amarides. But nobody really knew. We kept up a correspondence for nearly a year, but nobody can base a life on impersonal little notes. I tried to forget her. The letters stopped finally, and I did forget her, except in those lonely hours when a man must live with his thoughts, and at those times I used to visualize how Glennie would come to me. Then just yesterday, I learned she was trying a comeback in a cheesy little dive. Her voice broke into my thoughts. I've been so impressed at my reminiscences that I hadn't seen her come out into a little square of dance floor. She hardly looked 7 years older. Maybe up close the signs would be there. From where I saw her, she was just as lovely in that placid, quiet way as the day I first saw her in Mike Nellie's place. Her voice? I don't know. I never could tell whether she had talent or not. I had been in love with her before I heard her sing the first time, and I could never be objective about her after that. She sang 3 numbers, and the applause was long and loud, but she may have been boisterousness rather than enthusiasm. I simply didn't know whether it's a portent of a successful comeback or not. She took a bow, directed some of the applause to her accompanist, and then walked off. I didn't follow her. All at once, I knew that it would do no good to try and help her. I hadn't been able to help her before in time to prevent that grim step she had taken, and I wouldn't be able to now. She didn't need anybody's help. That was what I had failed to understand 7 years ago. I got up and quietly went out into the clean night air, ignoring the reproachful look the friendly waiter sent after me. He felt I was letting him down. Maybe I was, because now at last I thought I knew, beyond even a reasonable doubt, the answer to the question, had she murdered Lee Vining? But I wasn't going to answer it, not even in the secret niches of my own mind. It wasn't, after all, what I wanted to know. Far more important to me was that I'd found out this night what made Glennie tick. Her pianist had been a thin man with a wistful, familiar face, who probably looked even more like a little boy when he was asleep.